Okay, I think we are on air, everybody, so let's just get set up. Hello and welcome to week 3 of Stoic Mindfulness and Resilience training. Once again, my name is Donald Robertson. I'm the course designer and facilitator, and I'm speaking to you once again today from Nova Scotia in Canada. And I've got my dog Mookie here. She's not going to say hi just now, but she'll probably drop by later. So she might walk around in the background or bark or say hello. Hopefully that's okay. Could everyone just look for the live chat area right now in the right hand side of the screen, and please just say hello and just say where you're from in the world. And also just let me know if the sound and video are okay for everybody, and I'll just check that briefly while stragglers are coming along. Could everyone just look for the line? Cool. Okay, we are officially live. So, agenda setting. The agenda is we do the introductions, and then there's a little bit of brief housekeeping, some stats or news if you like. Then the main part of the webinar begins with me giving an overview of week 3 and responding to your comments on the course, and then responding to some of your live chat comments if I can pick those out towards the end. So if you have any questions, you can start thinking of those right now. You can post them now or post them towards the end. So in terms of housekeeping, practical stuff, there's a 30-second delay on this video, so I don't see your questions or comments immediately, but I'll try to answer them later on, like I said. The session should last 30 to 45 minutes. So far they've lasted 45 minutes, but I kind of feel that they might become slightly quicker now that we're getting into the 3rd and 4th weeks. It will be recorded so you can play it back anytime you like though. So I know a lot of people just drop in and watch 15 minutes or something, and then maybe they come back and watch the rest later. That's absolutely fine. Your live comments, your live chat comments are only here during the live broadcast, and then they'll go at the end. But afterwards, once it gets turned into a regular YouTube video, you'll have a permanent comments area underneath, and if I have to share links, I'll post them in there, and you can post comments there as well. And you can share this video and like it and comment and stuff like that, just like regular YouTube videos. Someone said they wanted me to look more at the camera as well, which I'm going to try and do, but I'm reading notes and reading your comments and stuff like that as well, so I may just kind of glance away at the screen when I'm doing that. So stats, we have 1,853 people, as you may know, doing Stoic Mindfulness and Resilience training this time round. We run this course once or twice a year. I can't actually remember how many we had last time we ran it. I think the first time we ran it we had like 500, 600, 700 people, something like that. It tends to go up a bit each time. So sometimes people ask me whether the growth of interest in modern Stoicism is just like a fad or something, and it seems to get bigger. Our stats just show it growing and growing and growing every year, basically. There are more people at the conference, more people doing Stoic Week every year, and that's been since 2012 when the Modern Stoicism team was formed at Exeter University by Professor Chris Gill. Last time we had 171 people simultaneously watching this broadcast, so there's a lot of you potentially in the chat at the moment. We had 324 chat messages last time, right? So given that and the 30-second delay, don't blame me if I can't answer all of the questions that are in there. Some of them kind of get lost a bit, but I do try to go through them towards the end. If I miss a question, by the way, at the end when I'm going through it, if you want to repost something that I may have overlooked, or a question that someone else has asked that you want me to answer, by all means do that. And again, bear in mind there'll be a 30-second delay before I see it, or before you see my response to it. The recording from last week has been viewed 1,600 times, and the first webinar we did has been viewed over 3,500 times. 82% of you are male. You're 82% male, you'll be pleased to know. That's more than it's often been in terms of participation in Stoic Week and SMRT. I think in one of them it was 60% male and 40% female. So I don't know whether it's mainly men that are looking at YouTube for some reason, or if it's actually 82% males that are on the course. But anyway, that's the demographics. 69% of you are from the US, Canada, or the UK, which are the three countries most commonly we have participants on all of our stuff from. I'm in Canada. I was from the UK. Modern Stoicism was founded in the UK, and we have people on the team that are in the US. So our team is kind of spread across the US, Canada, and the UK. But Australia is up and coming, and there's a Stoicon X event in Australia this year. So hi to any Aussies that happen to be there. Make yourself known in the live chat. Like, your Stoicism is now growing in Australia. Most of you are between 25 and 54, you may want to know. For some reason, we don't have as many people that are under 25 or over 54. So there you go. Week 3 is now available. And I will afterwards post a direct link to that. So we're kind of kicking that off. And today and next week I'll be reviewing the content for these weeks, in case anyone hasn't seen any of the previous webinars, which you can go back and watch the replays of, incidentally. And I'll be responding, like I said, to the comments that you've posted on the course discussion forum, which I think there are 56 of, so actually less than there were, or fewer than there were last time, because there weren't as many discussion areas. I've added more now though. So I'll proceed in a moment to do a little overview. I'll just check in and see where you guys are from. South Dakota, Malaysia, cool. Yeah, we also have a bunch of people from like all over other parts of the world as well. But like nearly 70% of you guys are from the US, Canada, or the UK, and then like from a wide variety of other countries. So let's have a look. So remember, the week 3 builds on weeks 1 and 2, and in some ways it's kind of going back to week 1. Week 1 is more about focusing attention on the present moment, on the here and now, and week 3 is closely related to that again. It's about mindfulness, but it's about another component of mindfulness. Modern psychologists tend to dismantle the construct of mindfulness, and they divide it into different psychological elements. And one of them is attention to the present moment, and another one of them is cognitive distancing, or what's also called cognitive or verbal diffusion by behavioural psychologists. So that is a technical concept that we use in modern psychology. It is one that I believe the Stoics were familiar with and frequently refer to, particularly Epictetus, and so I'll make reference to that. But it's not as widely discussed in the literature of Stoicism, because philosophers and classicists, like hardly any of them would have heard of cognitive distancing, so they tend not to notice or be aware of the fact, or have the terminology to articulate the fact even, that this is an important construct in Stoic psychology and Stoic therapy. But it is. And it's actually one of the main things that modern cognitive therapy inherited from Stoicism. I'll come back and talk a little bit about that later. So we're building on the previous sections. You don't have to carry on using the recordings and exercises and self-monitoring techniques from weeks 1 and 2. I think you can safely switch to the ones that are in week 3, but many people will want to continue using elements of the previous weeks alongside the current week as they progress through the course. So lesson 1, lesson week 3 I should say, what does the lesson consist in? So I'll talk about the lesson, I'll talk about the daily exercise, the audio recording, the self-monitoring process you're going to be using, and then I'll look at the discussion questions and what you folks have said about it. I've been told that I need to get out of the habit of saying you guys because it's considered sexist, so I'm reliably informed that you folks is an acceptable substitute nowadays. I'm trying to train myself to say that. Isn't that right, Ricky? Yeah. So we're going back to mindfulness. We're building in the here and now focus, adding in this concept of cognitive distance. This is great because I love this concept and I like explaining it. And hopefully it can be, it's a concept that some people will get immediately. It's a concept that some people think they get and completely misunderstand it. And it's a concept that other people find it difficult to get, but they can be coached into understanding. So that's why I think it's a good use of our time to have a webinar about it and discuss it a little bit, because I'm sure there'll be some people listening today that afterwards will go away and go, oh, it clicks for me now, I get it, whereas I didn't really get it before. It doesn't necessarily take long to teach people this concept. Most cognitive behavioural therapists would teach clients in the socialization phase of therapy, like in the first or second session, just by getting them to do little thought experiments, socialization experiments we call them in therapy. And so I'll tell you some of the typical ways we'd explain it, and then I'll talk a bit more about the concept in Stoicism. Maybe I should say that first. The most obvious example in Stoicism is in the Enchiridion, where Epictetus says to any troubling thought, and that presumably means an impression that's triggering a passion. He says you should say, and notice he says speak to the thought. So already talking to a thought is a technique of distancing. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But he says say to the thought, you're just an impression and not at all the thing that you claim to represent. Or you're just not you're merely an appearance and not at all the thing appearing. And it's clearer in the Greek, but basically he's clearly drawing this line of distinguishing between the internal representation of something and the thing as it stands in itself, and encouraging us to remember the distinction between thoughts and reality, basically. So why would that be so important? Well, we are naturally constituted as human beings to fuse our thoughts with reality and conflate the two things together. It's just human nature, and it's at the root of many psychological problems. We now know there's volumes and volumes of research on this. So it's the difference between someone saying, what if the world ends? What if everybody thinks I'm an idiot? And feeling anxious as a consequence of that. So that would be a fused thought. That would be a kind of worried or an anxious thought, let's say. What if everyone thinks I'm an idiot? And the distanced version of that would be, I notice right now I'm having the thought, what if everyone thinks I'm an idiot? So noticing that I'm having the thought, or having a thought about the thought, gives us distance from it, and also distance of the thought from reality. As Korzybski said, that we have to remember that the map is not the terrain. Like the thought is just a representation of reality. It's not reality itself, whereas normally the two things are fused together. So it's the difference between thinking, what if X happens, and thinking, I'm having the thought, what if X happens? Or it's kind of like putting our thoughts in quotation marks, if you like. You could also describe it as viewing our thoughts in a detached way, in an objective way, or viewing our thoughts as if they were someone else's thoughts. Viewing them like we're an anthropologist or a psychologist or something like that, studying someone else's thoughts and behaviour, which is also an interesting way of looking at it. So this is the way that I like to explain cognitive distancing or diffusion. This is one of my favourite ways of explaining it. Imagine that you're on a camping trip and it's late at night and it's dark and you're in the middle of the woods and you're sitting around a campfire, you're drinking your coffee or whatever, which I'm going to have a sip of right now. And somebody's telling a horror story and it's really scary. And you're getting really into it. And you notice that you're kind of starting to get tense and your heart rate's speeding up. Maybe you're kind of sweating a little bit, so it's kind of like really scary. Imagine you're 12 years old or something like that and you're sitting around hearing this scary story and stuff about ghosts and werewolves or whatever, and you're getting really lost in it. Now, you could even view that as a kind of hypnosis, right? Even though there's nothing scary that's actually happening, like the ghosts and the werewolves and stuff aren't real, like you're kind of physically reacting to them as if they were real. Like just because you're getting so lost in the words, you're lost in the story. And you'll also tend to, typically in that fused state, there are interesting correlates of it. So one of the most noticeable ones, a very simple one, is you'll tend to lose track of time when you're fused with a stream of thought like that, lost in a story. Now, imagine you're listening to someone telling the story and they've got a funny accent like mine, or they've got like a lisp or a speech impediment or something, or they're just rubbish at telling stories. And you're kind of trying to get into the story, but you're sort of distracted by the way they're saying it. So you're listening more to the storytelling rather than to the story. You're kind of focusing more on the words they're using or the sound of their voice. And then you would still be hearing the words, but you wouldn't be fused with them in the same way. You wouldn't be lost in the story. In fact, time might seem to drag rather than you losing track of time. So there might be two 12-year-old kids, and one of them is losing track of time, starting to kind of tense up, starting to sweat, heart rate going because he's lost in the story. Another 12-year-old kid might be listening to exactly the same story, but he's just distracted by the speaker's funny accent or lisp. And so time is dragging for him, and he's not really feeling any of the responses to it. So it's kind of de-hypnosis, if you like, or distancing. He's kind of snapping out of it. Now that would spoil a good story, but imagine now that worry is pretty much the same thing. It's a story that we tell ourselves about catastrophes and depressing and scary stuff. Psychologists tend to use the word worry now to refer to perseverative thinking. So when people have thoughts that are kind of sticky and they go on for a long time, and they tend to distinguish between worry and rumination. So worry is a chain of thoughts, usually about the future, associated with anxiety, and tends to involve catastrophizing. So we call that what if thinking. What if the world ends tomorrow? What if I go bankrupt? What if I get ill? These kind of unanswerable, unsolvable problems. Like, some people describe worrying as failed or frustrated problem solving. There's a bunch of different ways that we try and conceptualize it, but it's thinking about stuff that could go wrong basically and going over it and over it. What if this happens? What if that happens? Rumination is very similar, but tends to be more focused on the past, more associated with depression, although sometimes associated with anger. And rumination often involves why questions, or kind of trying to analyze the meaning of things in an interminable way. Why me? Why is this happening? What does it mean? Questions that actually can't be answered. And so we drive ourselves nuts going round and round and round in circles thinking about them, and that prevents us from doing other things in life. So morbid rumination can make people stew on things, dwell on them, brood over them, and waste many hours, and it prevents them from doing healthy things in life, engaging in healthy activities, because they'll stay at home to brood on negative thoughts in extreme cases. Or worry also will often prevent people falling asleep at night, so they'll spend hours and hours going over and over things, kind of addicted to dwelling on it, and obviously that stimulates their mind and body and prevents them from falling asleep. So imagine that worry and rumination are like negative self-hypnosis, as they're sometimes described, like a story that we tell ourselves and we're just completely lost in it and we lose track of time, and it affects us physically and emotionally as if the stuff that we're imagining was actually happening. And then imagine that we could learn to snap out of the self-hypnosis, terminate it, take a step back from it. We could learn to spoil the story, step out of the story. Why do we want to be telling ourselves this catastrophic story? By thinking more about the way that we're telling the story rather than becoming absorbed in the meaning of the words. One way that we do that in ACT is by taking a negative thought and repeating it very rapidly over and over again for like a minute or two. Or you could also allow yourself to worry but do it in slow motion, and then you'll tend to become more aware of the here and now and the process of worrying rather than the content of it, rather than being fused with the content of it, I should say. And another thing you can do is just notice your facial expression when you're worrying. People tend to lose touch with the here and now. That's another marker of worry. So I didn't even hear the phone ring. I was too busy worrying about stuff. I didn't notice that I was biting my fingernails because I was worrying about stuff. People lose touch with their body, their behaviour and their environment when they're engrossed in worry. So You can do the opposite to snap yourself out of it, like becoming more aware of the way you're using your body. What are you doing with your fingers when you worry? How do you sit when you worry? Like, what do your eyes do when you worry? Do you close your eyes? Do they just stare into the middle distance? Asking these questions to heighten your awareness will tend to ruin worry, which is useful. Now, I'm kind of going a little bit, I suppose this is the lesson, like I'm not strictly following our schedule, but I want to really kind of get to some key concepts here. There's something in particular that psychologists are very keen for you to do, for people that struggle with worry and rumination to do, and that is to also stop thought avoidance. Like, so when people worry about things, they're kind of vacillating between dwelling on the problem and also avoiding thinking about it. So they often try and block the thoughts from their mind as well, and that generally seems to be an unhealthy, maladaptive way of coping with disturbing thoughts, or impressions as the Stoics call them. So this raises a paradox for therapists, because we want to help people to cope with anxiety-provoking, depressive or angry thoughts, upsetting thoughts, so we don't want you to be fused with them, but we don't want you also to try and block them from your mind or avoid thinking about them, because that also has negative consequences. So how can you think about something without thinking about it? Like, how can you accept these thoughts and allow them to pass through your mind without becoming fused with them? Well, in the same way that you can listen to the ghost story without being fused with it. You can accept that someone is telling a story, you can listen to the story without allowing yourself, as Epictetus says, to be swept along with the impressions and the feelings. And you do that by changing your relationship with the thoughts. So you have worried or anxious thoughts, you accept them, but you do it from a distance, if you like. You do it viewing them as thoughts. Sometimes that's called metacognitive awareness, which is a bit of a jargony term, but it means awareness that thoughts are thoughts, and viewing them as events that are happening within your mind, rather than just kind of treating them as if they were reality. So I went into that in a little bit of detail because I think it's important. I guess that does bring me on quite neatly to the daily exercise, which is the acceptance and commitment therapy leaves in a stream exercise. And I've given you that. It's not in Stoicism, although it might be interesting to compare it to certain themes or ideas in Stoicism. There's certainly many references to rivers. The leaves in a stream exercise is really easy to do. It's really easy to learn, and it's training you to find this, what seems like a subtle balancing act between grabbing onto thoughts and pushing them away. So a thought goes through your mind and you imagine, first of all, there are two steps. First of all, you imagine the thought written on a piece of paper, or if it's an image, like a photograph, like stuck in a leaf, and then you picture it at a distance, so it's still there, you're accepting its presence, you're not trying to get rid of it, and then you just allow it naturally to flow down the river. Now, therapists will also always attach the caveat. You have to be careful that you're not doing this in such a way that you're kind of flushing the thoughts down the toilet or something. It becomes a thought avoidance technique. Your focus, rather, should be on a feeling of accepting the presence of the thought, but viewing it in a slightly different way, at a distance, as if it's an object, be it writing on a piece of paper or a photograph that's a physical object that you could look at from a distance, because that makes it less hypnotic, it makes it less evocative and distressing. And doing it with any sort of thoughts is a useful way of learning this neither hanging on nor pushing away attitude, that finding this balance. Now, the thing I'd like to emphasize about that, although it might sound odd, we're just trying to get back to normality in a sense. Research in psychotherapy shows that people have loads of automatic thoughts, thousands and thousands of automatic thoughts every day, many of which seem like, quite surprisingly distressing. So someone might be standing at a train station and they suddenly have a thought pops into their mind, what if I just push this old lady in front of the train? Now, someone with OCD might be racked with guilt about that and might become extremely anxious that the thought could potentially make them do that thing. And so that it becomes pathological for them, because they may start to struggle with it. They may desperately try and prevent that thought from recurring again. Whereas if it was somebody who doesn't have OCD, they might just go, yeah, that's a strange thought, and then just kind of like move on and think about something else because they're indifferent to it, as we would say to Stoicism. Say in Stoicism, it's an automatic thought or an involuntary impression. It's neither good nor bad in itself. It's just some background noise that's popped into our mind. But if we get upset by it, we make it sticky. So we naturally have lots of these thoughts that we don't try to block, and I also don't become confused with. They just kind of come and go, and we're trying to get back to that really and learn the knack of that so that we can do it in response to thoughts that are sticky and upsetting. So that's a bit about the leaves in the stream exercise. The audio recording is the evening review. That's a good opportunity. It's a different sort of technique, but it's a good opportunity to practice distancing. I'm also going to ask you to do worry postponement, because Epictetus talks about that. And this is a very common technique in the treatment of worry. So you notice the thoughts going through your mind. Rather than thinking, I mustn't think that, you'll say, I'll come back to it later. Come back to it at 10 o'clock tonight when I'm doing my evening review. Now, you don't have to actually think about it then. We know that a lot of people, if they're worrying about something during the day, they write down health or whatever on a piece of paper and put it in their pocket. I'll come back to that at 11 o'clock tonight when I sit in my armchair to think about things. They sit in their armchair, pull out a piece of paper. They might think, yeah, it doesn't really matter to me anymore. So they don't have to worry about it anymore. And one of the things that you'll also notice is when worried thoughts or angry thoughts or depressed thoughts pop into your mind, you'll often be feeling different. You'll be in a different kind of physiological state, maybe in a state of nervous arousal. And one of the things you're doing is allowing your feelings to naturally abate and then returning to the thought so that you can review it in a different feeling state. So you can review it more rationally, more objectively. And I want you to think of that as a natural process as well. Like normally when you're engaged in any task that requires attention, and that would include, or similarly, I should say, when you're falling asleep at night, someone who suffers from pathological worry will have a thought pop into their mind and they won't be able to get to sleep because of it. Whereas most people might think, oh damn, I haven't paid that bill. I'll think about that tomorrow. I don't need to dwell on it just now. I'll come back to it later at a more appropriate time. That's a normal, perfectly natural way to respond to automatic thoughts. So not desperately trying to block it from their mind, just acknowledging it and saying it's fine to return to that later. That's a natural, healthy way of responding to automatic thoughts. And it's useful to learn to be able to do that on command, if you like. The evening review also, something I think it's useful to know about the ancient Stoics is that they put a lot of emphasis on having a mentor. So Zeno taught Cleanthes and they lived alongside each other. They were around each other all the time. And this was important to the Stoics because the mentor or the tutor was given permission to critique the character of the student. And so for Marcus Aurelius, I think probably Junius Rusticus was the person that fulfilled that role. We don't have people following us around to question our behaviour and coach us in Stoicism 24 hours a day. So the closest we can get is to do these exercises where we become our own coach, our own therapist, by doing the evening review. So sitting down and reviewing our thoughts and actions before we go to sleep in a condensed manner, obviously, but viewing them as if we were kind of observing a student, observing someone else's behaviour and offering them friendly, compassionate, constructive advice, basically filling the role of a coach or therapist for ourselves. And the main question that we should ask at that time, according to the Stoics, so reviewing how we got on through the day, is the things that we were dwelling on, are they up to me or not? Are you placing more value on external things than you are on your own character? This dichotomy of control question is the fundamental thing that Epictetus in particular wants us to keep coming back to. Self-monitoring exercise this week is tied in with managing worry and rumination. And also what I mentioned earlier about losing track of time, I want you to monitor how much time you spend ruminating or worrying about things that are unhealthy or unproductive. And again, you're not trying to suppress those thoughts, but just notice them, accept them, and then say, yeah, I'll come back to that later at your evening review period. And reviewing like how much time elapsed before you noticed that you were lost in these thoughts is a good way of encouraging yourself to get into that detached scientific kind of attitude, almost as if you're an anthropologist observing a new tribe's behaviour. You know, you're looking at yourself in a slightly strange, askance way. Like, you know, look at the strange ritual that I go through every day where I worry about random crazy bullshit that goes through my head. And, you know, like viewing it in that kind of detached way, a kind of matter-of-fact way, helps us to snap out of it. So we're not struggling against it, but we're not getting sucked into the evil self-hypnosis of worry. Notice also that doesn't prevent us from problem-solving genuine problems as well. We can go back and view things in a relaxed, calmer, more considered way and do genuine problem-solving if we have to. An important part of this that came up in the previous self-monitoring is if you can the earlier you catch yourself. In therapy, we talk about spotting early warning signs of worry or rumination. So that the earlier you catch yourself, the more likely you are to snap out of it, because you won't have activated the cognitive schemas and have evoked the nervous arousal. You won't be in an anxious mode of thinking or a depressed mode of thinking if you catch it early enough, so you'll be more able to derail the negative patterns that you see emerging. And I know some people find that difficult, other people are really good at it. It's a practice in mindfulness, essentially, like spotting the earliest possible signs of these negative habits of thinking occurring. It's easier, again, if you have a therapist. I'll just ask clients, you know, what was the very first thought that went through your mind? What were your facial expression doing at that time? What were you doing with your hands? Are you standing or sitting? Where were you at the time? What kind of sensations were going along with that? And I would expect most clients to say, I don't know. But I'll ask them those questions nevertheless to sensitize them to look out for those early warning signs throughout the following week, so they'll be more mindful. This crazy guy was asking me what I was doing with my fingers when I worry. I've got no idea. And they go, oh yeah, I noticed I kind of bite my fingernails or whatever, or I notice I'm tensing my fists now because I was questioned about it. But you can do that for yourself by making notes when you're self-monitoring, writing down the early warning signs and trying to catch things earlier and earlier. So we talk about nipping a habit in the bud, catching it at an early stage. That takes away its automaticity, and that we can do with worry postponement. Which brings me neatly to the discussion questions, round about roughly on schedule. So we probably will be 45 minutes or so today. And the questions were, what are the benefits of recalling what's under your control and what isn't in difficult situations? What would be the long-term consequences of doing the opposite and blurring that distinction? And also there's another kind of optional question, which is that are the Stoics right to say that only our own actions, in a nutshell, are truly under our control? I'm really just asking that question because it comes up a lot. It's a common misunderstanding of the Stoics. So I think most of you folks, by this point, will have spotted that the Stoics are specifically referring to voluntary thoughts and actions when they're talking about what's under our control. So the comments that you've put into the course so far, there's 9 that I've picked out. So Wayne mentioned that what emerged from doing these practices was an awareness that he had more control than he previously realized over certain things. So people often talk about the acceptance side of things. They see it as being about learning to accept things in a resigned way that are outside their control. But the flip side of that is also taking more responsibility for a greater range of things that are under your control. And I think the valued action exercises help with that to some extent. And that's absolutely correct. We should also be taking more control for other things. I mentioned earlier that I believe that many mental health problems are due to people making a very simple confusion between automatic and voluntary cognitions or thinking processes. and becoming clearer about that distinction in particular is integral to psychological resilience. And, you know, like, people with OCD might take too much responsibility for thoughts that are just automatic background noise, like the flotsam and jetsam of the mind. You know, like that, they should just go, yeah, it's just a random thought popping through my mind. It doesn't say anything about my personality. You know, it's not something I'm doing voluntarily. So, you know, to learn to be more detached, more indifferent towards the automatic thoughts that are going through our mind in some cases. But worry, which we've been talking about, is interesting because psychologists generally believe that people underestimate how much control they have over worry. So people, you know, it's the opposite problem in a way. So people think that worrying is just something that's out of their control. And actually, it's mainly a strategic thinking process. It's mainly something that we can learn to control. So we probably feel that it's not under our control because we're fused with it and we're losing track of time and stuff. But when we spot what's going on, actually, it's you know, easier than people typically realise just to interrupt those trains of thought. But you have to catch yourself doing it first. That's absolutely the key. If you don't spot it happening, then you can't interrupt it. The past as an indifferent is something that Anisodemus has mentioned, and apologies to any Roman Catholics, but the kind of Christian concept of guilt and what people call Catholic guilt and the kind of the negative sense is what this reminds me of. That the Stoic idea of the past isn't under our control, so it's morally indifferent. There's no point beating ourselves up about it. Sure, we can learn about things that we've done in the past and not to repeat them again, but the past is the past, and there's a sense in which blaming ourselves and feeling guilty about things that happened in the past is futile and pointless. So the Stoics would certainly say we should review our past events and learn from them, but they are in the realm of the indifferent, and it's useful to see that. I feel that helped me a lot personally. I used to feel really guilty about stuff and bad about stuff that happened in the past, and learning to think of it as, you know, there's nothing I can do about it anymore, and accepting that, like, it helped me a lot personally. It helps a lot of clients as well in therapy. Anisodemus mentioned also a technique of imagining sad events that as if they'd happened to a fictional character. Yeah, that's a really interesting technique. I do something a little bit like that, because, you know, then there's no point, there's nothing you can do about things that have happened to a fictional character. You should just be equally as indifferent about it. Things that are in the recent past, I think to myself, I should be no more upset about this than I am about the Highland clearances, which happened to the Highlanders in Scotland 200 years ago, like, or, you know, catastrophes that happened in ancient history. Why should I be any more upset about this than about something that happened 2,000 years ago, like the massacre of the Gauls by Julius Caesar, for example, like the genocide in Gaul? Why should I get particularly angry or upset about that? Well, why should I be upset about stuff that's happened recently or happening now, or that's not under my direct control? You know, what really matters is how much control I have over it. And for some reason, it's easier to feel that kind of resignation or detachment to things that are fictional or in the past. Measuring past worry compared to the outcome Mark mentioned. So just noticing that we worry about a lot of things and they don't happen, or it's futile, like the worry is just wasted energy. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the research in cognitive therapy that relates to worry postponement, by researchers in particular like Borkovic in the States, highlights the fact that if you ask students to keep worry diaries, you clearly, demonstrably, a lot of the things that people worry about never actually happen, or the worrying that people engage in, they view themselves as having been a waste of time and energy, and possibly to have been counterproductive or to have made things worse. Now, of course, sometimes it is problem solving that people are engaged in, but people often confuse genuine problem solving with unproductive worrying that doesn't really achieve anything. And keeping a diary is a good scientific objective way of measuring that and learning to spot to clarify that distinction and spot how much of our supposed problem solving is actually just pointless worry. Wayne mentioned it saves time. I try to stress that to people doing this course. The feedback that we get from people who get this far and complete the course is because the main reason people give for dropping out of or not completing this or any other course is I didn't have enough time. But by this point, you should be starting to realise that if you do these exercises, you'll have more time. You'll be like, what am I going to do with all this time when I'm not worrying? I'm going to have to take up knitting or something like that because I've got all this time in my hands. Like, you're unlearning things. You're stopping doing things that wasted a lot of time before. And people generally report by this point and by the end of the course having more time on their hands as a result of using the exercises. Wayne mentioned that judgments are under our control as well as actions. Yeah, just to reiterate that one more time and clarify it, actually in the next sentence of the Enchiridion, Epictetus, I think, says explicitly that what he means by what's up to us, what's entirely our responsibility, not just our actions, but also our mental, not just our physical actions, but also our mental actions, our speech as well, the voluntary thoughts and judgments that we engage in, as well as the things that we do externally in terms of our behaviour. Actually, the only thing that's really under our control is our volition. Even raising or lowering my arm might be something that's thwarted by injury or disease or whatever. Jari mentions not blaming others and eliminating victimhood is an important consequence of these exercises. Yeah, that can be a huge release. Other people aren't under our control, only our responses to them are. And Stoicism is certainly very good at helping people to overcome this kind of victim mentality. Martin mentions that this part of the course is helpful as a way of regaining more focus on the here and now, and I would definitely agree with that. Stephen mentions people wasting their time being mad with athletes as celebrities and the government. So angry with the news, I think you mean, like ruminating about the news and stuff. Yeah, like how much time do people waste doing that? And how much time do people spend, waste on the browsing the internet and things like that? The only way you can interrupt that is by spotting that you're doing it and, maybe even quantifying it each day. And, that will, in many cases, for cognitive therapy, that would often just be a starting point, but if it's done well, it's often enough for many people to change the behaviour. And Barry says it's important to remember that the Stoics aren't saying we can't influence external things. These have to be crazy to say that, right? The Stoics aren't saying that we cannot influence other people or we can't influence the outcome of our actions. That's so nonsensical. Obviously, that's not what they're saying. But they're making a distinction between things that are entirely up to us or entirely under our direct control and things that happen as a consequence of that, in which fate or extraneous factors can potentially intervene. So in any given situation, if you influence other people, you influence external events, the only levers that you can pull to do that are your own words and actions, basically, including your mental activity, if you like. But in terms of influencing external events, even your thoughts have to influence some external behaviour, words or actions, and that's where your locus of control is situated. So it's useful to focus your attention on that, which again brings you back to the here and now. So a lot of these techniques, hopefully it will become more obvious, and I don't think it is obvious at first, these techniques, a lot of them look different, but at the end of the day, they converge in the same area. Like they all kind of tie in together, complement each other, which is interesting to observe. So those are all the comments that I managed to lift off of the web. We're kind of nearly out of time. I'm just going to quickly have a look at your comments just now. Pop out the comment sections, the live chat area, and see what you folks are saying. I've probably said that 100 times without realising, having spoken about awareness. So what have you been saying? Game Boob says, I disagree with the Stoic conception of the good and indifference. Well, cool. Good to know. Something that understands being a good reason why to cultivate virtue for virtue alone. Yeah, sure. Like, that's a whole debate that we can't really address right now, but you know, it's an interesting thing to have a discussion about, sure. Not something like we're going to be able to answer right now, I think. Balance between reacting and responding. You guys are having a whole, like, you folks are having a whole debate in here about Stoic ethics and stuff. Don't think anyone practices virtue for its own sake alone. I disagree with that. Like, I agree with the Stoics. Like, it doesn't make sense to make virtue an instrumental good in my view. Like, the ethics, like, essentially collapses if you do that. But you know, I acknowledge that other people like adopt a more consequentialist position and disagree with that. Obviously, the Epicureans. But it's certainly not an implausible position. In fact, I think the Stoics are correct to say that. Virtue is its own reward. A lot for modern psychology, especially positive psychology rather than philosophies and existentialism. Yeah, that's fair. Well, in that case, you should look at, like, I mean, there's a large body of literature in modern psychology that supports the Stoic idea that virtue is its own reward. Look at the stuff on values clarification that we've already covered in the previous week, for example, and the research on acceptance and commitment therapy on that. See if there's any. Are there any questions in here? Or are you just having a debate among yourselves? Are you still listening to me? Wow, we're getting into debate about Epicureanism, I see. Game Boob has got a term paper on it, so that would be fascinating to read. I look forward to having my worldview transformed by Game Boob's term paper. There are arguments on both sides, like, and we should definitely be doing philosophy. You know, we should be like arriving at conclusions rationally based on the arguments that are available. And the psychological research is a factor that we might want to take into account in doing that. But of course, like, you know, I expect that in the community there's going to be people that hold different philosophical views. I think that's, like, I'm not seeing a lot of other questions in there just now. Apologies if I've missed any. So I think we might want to call it a day because we're about 50 minutes in or so now. So I thank you very much for coming along and keeping me company today, so I'm not just talking to myself. And it's goodbye from me once again in Nova Scotia, and good luck with week 3. If you have any remaining questions, wait until this gets turned into a YouTube video and then post your questions there and I'll have a look at them, or in the discussion forums in the course. And otherwise, goodbye once again from me, and goodbye from Mickey Dog over there. And you go say hi, Mick. I don't think you're on camera, but Mickey Dog says goodbye. Oh, hey bud. Okay, I will see you guys at the same time next week. Goodbye.